Quadrilaterals. Quadrilaterals are any figure that has 4 sides and 4 angles. This figure has 4 sides, and then if you look at the corners, there are 4 angles. This figure has 4 sides, but it's not enclosed, so it would not be considered a quadrilateral. So put a big X on that. Now we're going to talk about different types of quadrilaterals. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral that has opposite sides parallel and opposite angles congruent. So here's a quadrilateral, and it has these little arrows here show that those 2 sides are parallel, and then it's got another double or a double marking saying that those sides are parallel. Do you see these single arcs in each corner? Those show that those 2 angles have the same measurement. They are congruent. Congruent means having the same measurement. And then over here, the double arced, those both have the same measurement also. Sometimes you'll see a parallelogram look like this, where it's kind of going up and down. Those are all still opposite sides are parallel and opposite angles are congruent. Now these 2 are also parallelograms, but they also have other names, but they are types of parallelograms. We're going to get into those in a minute. So now we have a rectangle. A rectangle is a parallelogram. So it has all of the characteristics of a parallelogram, except now we've got the parallel sides, top and bottom, side to side. Except now it has 4 right angles. So those are those little boxes. Those mean that that's measuring 90 degrees. 4 right angles. The diagonals are of the same length and they bisect each other. So a diagonal is when you have a line. This dotted line is a diagonal. It goes from one vertex to another across the figure, across the shape. So if we have both of these diagonals, if you notice, they chop each other in half. This red length is the same length as the blue length. They have the same measurements. This is also a rectangle. You'll see long and skinny rectangles. This guy over here on the left is also a rectangle, but it also has another type of name. And that is a square. A square is a rectangle. It has 90-degree angles, except now it has 4 congruent sides. So these little slashes, these little marks in each side show that those sides are the same length. Diagonals are perpendicular. So not only are these diagonals the same, and they cut each other in half when they intersect, they're also perpendicular to each other. So that's another cool characteristic of a square. And now we have a rhombus. A rhombus is a parallelogram. Has the opposite sides parallel, just like those arrows show. Opposite angles are congruent also. So that was all part of a parallelogram. So it has those characteristics. It has 4 congruent sides. Well, a square had 4 congruent sides, but this is not a square because it doesn't have those 90-degree angles. So it has 4 congruent sides, and then about the diagonals, they're perpendicular, and they bisect each other. So they chop each other in half. Those 2 sides are the same, those 2 measurements, and those 2 measurements. And then also they meet at 90 degrees. So it's almost like a square if it had those 90-degree angles, but it's not. So rhombus. This confuses a lot of kids, rhombus versus square, but this is not a square. Now we have trapezoids. They're quadrilaterals that have only one pair of parallel sides. Do you see the parallel sides here going up and down? Do you see the parallel sides here going on the top and bottom? Here's another trapezoid that's kind of unique. It has the parallel top and bottom, and then it also has 2 sides that have the same measurement. And these trapezoids are known as isosceles trapezoids. You might have learned about isosceles triangles that had only 2 sides that were congruent. Well, isosceles trapezoids have 2 sides that are congruent in length. Now we're going to talk about classifying quadrilaterals. We've got this figure here. It has 4 sides, so it is a quadrilateral. But it could also be known as something else. It has the opposite sides being parallel, so therefore it could also be known as a parallelogram. And that's the best name for it. That's the most accurate name for it. Parallelogram. We're going to do another one. We've got this figure. Well, it has 4 sides, but also it has 1 pair of parallel sides. So it's going to be called a trapezoid. It can't be called anything else. That's its most accurate name. A trapezoid is a quadrilateral. Now we're going to have another one. Hopefully this one's going to be easy for you. Probably most of you recognize that it's a rectangle, but it can also be a few other things. It could be a quadrilateral because it has 4 sides. It's a parallelogram because it has the opposite sides being parallel, so it's a parallelogram. And then it has the 90-degree angles, so that makes it a rectangle, and that's its most accurate name. And then we have this guy. Most of you are probably going to say that it's a square, but it could also be a few other things. It has 4 sides. Opposite sides are parallel. It's a parallelogram. To be a rectangle, you're a parallelogram with 90-degree angles, and yeah, it has that, so it's a rectangle. Now it has all the sides the same, so that makes it a square. That's the most accurate name. But also it could be considered a rhombus because a rhombus is a quadrilateral with all 4 sides congruent. So it's also called a rhombus, but the most accurate name would be square. And now we have this. Well, it's 4 sides, it's a quadrilateral, opposite sides are parallel, it's a parallelogram. It doesn't have 90-degree angles, so it can't be a rectangle or a square. It does have the 4 sides equal or congruent. The 4 sides have the same measurement, so it could be called a rhombus, and that's the most accurate name. So those are your quadrilaterals. Hopefully you're going to be good to go for this.